Power for all. Diesel engine evolution for the new generation. Daihatsu Diesel, in pursuit of infinite possibilities. This video shows the proper maintenance procedures for the Model DE18. It mainly deals with the cylinder head, fuel oil injection pump, pistons and connecting rods, and main bearing shell. Some maintenance procedures are slightly different from the instruction manual, so please use this as your reference. First, we will explain how to inspect and maintain the cylinder head. Prepare all necessary tools for the dismantling process. Before dismantling the cylinder head, set the governor handle to stop. Then turn off the main valve of the air tank. If multiple units are installed, turn off the engine inlet valve. Close the valves for the water cooling system, the fuel oil system, and the lube oil system. Then drain the cooling water from the engine. Remove the indicator valve cover on the cylinder head and then open the indicator valve. Remove the cylinder head cover. Remove the indicator valve. Remove the cooling water outlet flange, located on the upper part of the cylinder head. Remove the exhaust gas thermometer. Remove the high-pressure fuel block and the inlet connector. Remove the tightening nut of the nozzle holder. Pull out the fuel oil injection valve using the nozzle holder extracting tool. Be careful not to leave any circular packing behind in the cylinder head. After removing the high-pressure fuel oil block and the fuel oil injection valve, be careful to replace the covers on both the fuel oil injection pump coupling and the insertion part of the cylinder head to prevent foreign matter from entering. Remove the exhaust pipe mounting bolt and other pipes around the cylinder head. Loosen the rocker arm shaft holder tightening nut and remove the rocker arm shaft assembly. Make the identification marks IE and draw out the intake and exhaust valve T-yokes and the push rods. Simultaneously remove the 4 cylinder head tightening nuts using the hydraulic jack. Remove the cylinder head bolt caps. Align the jack stand notches so that the jack stand does not interfere with the adjacent cylinder head. Attach the hydraulic jack on the head bolt. Connect the hydraulic pump, terminal 4T, and hydraulic jack with the high-pressure hose. Turn the hydraulic piston of the jack into the hydraulic cylinder as far as it will go. Mount the jack onto the cylinder head bolt securely, then back it up 1 turn. Raise the oil pressure to the prescribed oil pressure level. Loosen the nut. Confirm the oil pressure at which the nuts start turning and check that the cylinder head bolts have been tightened securely. Lower the oil pressure slowly with the pump release valve. Before removing the high-pressure hose, tighten the hydraulic jack once to discharge the oil. Remove the hydraulic jack. Jack stand joint bolt and nut. Remove the starting valve piping. Secure the cylinder head lifting tool to the stud bolt for retaining the nozzle holder on the top of the head, and lift the cylinder head using a chain block and wire rope. If the cylinder head is dropped while it is being lifted, serious accidents can occur. To lift it, use the specified lifting tool and strictly follow the standards for the use of wire rope. Slowly lift the cylinder head, taking care not to damage the threads of the cylinder head bolt. Be careful that cooling water in the head does not enter the cylinder. Remove the 1 and 2 cylinder head gaskets and cover the cylinder head with a clean cloth or tape to prevent the entry of foreign matter into the cylinder liner, intake duct, and other fluid passages. When positioning the removed cylinder head, take care not to damage its lower surface. Remove the cylinder head lifting tool. Remove the starting valve. To avoid reassembly errors, put intake and exhaust valve identification marks and cylinder numbers on the valve tops and heads before disassembly. Using the special tool, remove the 4 intake and exhaust valves simultaneously. Fit the base to the stud bolt for the retaining nozzle holder on the top surface of the cylinder head. Fit the plate onto the valve rotator bodies and screw the special bolt into the base. Screw the special bolt in further to depress the intake and exhaust valve springs and remove the valve cotters. Unscrew the special bolt and remove the valve spring tools. Remove the valve rotators and the intake and exhaust valve springs. Check the markings on the intake exhaust valve heads and draw out the valves toward the combustion chamber. Arrange the removed parts and check for damage, corrosion, and contact marks. After removing the above valves, check for carbon adhesion on combustion surfaces and in the intake and exhaust ports. After removing any carbon from the combustion surface and the intake and exhaust ports, carefully clean them and perform a color check for cracks. The combustion surface and the ports near the combustion surface are exposed to high temperatures and high pressure. Check them particularly carefully. Properly perform a color check in accordance with the work instruction manual. When wiping up any liquid penetrant, do not spray it directly with cleaning solution. Check for corrosion and gas leakage on the intake and exhaust ports and the sealing surfaces. The stem diameter of the intake and exhaust valves is measured at 3 different points with the micrometer. Using the calipers, measure the thickness of the valve seat height. Take the measurements according to the chart. Measure the intake and exhaust valves and the valve guides. Record those measurements. Perform the facing up of the intake and exhaust valves properly based on the work instruction manual. Conduct a blue lead check of the seat surface conditions after finishing the facing up. Measure the valve head thicknesses and the valve seat dimensions with calipers again, and confirm that the measured valves do not exceed the usage limits. Each of the stem seals is used exclusively for either the intake or exhaust side. Colored rubber seals are used to indicate the difference, gray signifying the intake side, green signifying the exhaust side. Before reinserting each valve, check its identification mark, either I, intake, or E, exhaust. On the combustion side of the cylinder head, replace each valve in its original position according to the identification mark engraved on the valve head before disassembly. To prevent incorrect reassembly, the stem diameters on the intake and exhaust sides are different. Insert each valve from the combustion chamber side. If the inner lip of the stem seal is damaged, when the valve is inserted, it will contaminate the valve and increase lubrication oil consumption. Apply lubricating oil to the valve stem and insert the valve slowly. Make sure there are no scratches, debris, or any signs of damage or corrosion on the valve spring surfaces, and then fit the valve springs. After checking the valve rotators, fit the valve rotators onto the cylinder head. Reassemble the valves using the valve spring tools and reversing the disassembly procedure. Fit the base to the stud bolt for the retaining nozzle holder on the top surface of the cylinder head. Fit the plate onto the valve rotator body and screw the special bolt into the base. Pressing down the valve spring, remove the valve cotters. remove the valve spring tools. After reassembly, check that the cutters are completely sound. Tap the upper parts of the intake and exhaust valves with the plastic hammer and check for anti-clockwise rotation of the valve rotator. Apply grease to the O-ring of the starting valve body. Check the gasket of the starting valve seat and install the starting valve. Attach the starting valve cover and tighten with the prescribed torque. Inspection and maintenance of the fuel oil injection valve. Disassembling the nozzle. Remove the cap nut. Loosen the adjustment screw. Fix the holder housing in a vise and loosen the retaining nut. Extract the needle valve from the nozzle. Dismantle the knock pin, spacer, push rod, and spring from the fuel oil injection nozzle holder. Check the injection holes in the nozzle tip. Clean all parts and examine them. Reassemble the fuel injection valve in the reverse order of the disassembly procedure. First, insert the spring seat, spring, push rod, pin, and adjustment screw in the nozzle holder. Secure the nozzle holder body in a vise. Put the spacer and the knock pin of the nozzle together and install them into the holder housing. Apply the Molykote U-Paste lubricant to the holder housing thread, the seating face of the retaining nut, and the outer periphery of the nozzle. Then, screw the retaining nut into the holder housing by hand. Tighten the retaining nut to the specified torque. Attach the nozzle to the injection test device and adjust the valve opening pressure. Set it to the regular constant pressure before tightening it. Make sure the nozzle sprays properly a couple of times at the regular pressure level. Check the fuel oil injected against a blank sheet of paper. Confirm there is no fuel oil dripping from the nozzle tip after the injection test. Tighten the lock nut and then check again at the regular pressure before attaching the cap nut. Reassembly of the cylinder head is done in the reverse sequence of its dismantling. Attach the cylinder head lifting tool to the cylinder head and elevate it. Clean the cylinder head seals, the cylinder liner, and the engine frame. Replace the cylinder head gasket and the cylinder liner O-ring with new ones. Attach the 1 and 2 cylinder head gaskets. Fit the gasket 2 into the starting air connecting pipe on the engine frame, mounted so that the gap between the cylinder head bolt is kept even. Make sure there is no foreign matter in the cylinder before reattaching the cylinder head. After lifting the cylinder head, pay attention to the threads on the cylinder head bolts to prevent them from being damaged. Lower the cylinder head slowly. Make sure that the SA connecting pipe on the engine frame and the cylinder liner collar are fit securely within the cylinder head before mounting. Insert the exhaust pipe gasket between the cylinder head and exhaust pipe. Apply an anti-seizure agent to the exhaust pipe bolts and tighten the exhaust pipe temporarily. Remove the cylinder head hangers. Carefully clean the threaded portions of the cylinder head bolts, the threaded portions and the seat surface of the cylinder head bolt tightening nuts, and the contact surfaces of the cylinder head with the tightening nuts. Check for dirt and foreign matter. When attaching the cylinder head tightening nuts, do not confuse the upper and lower surfaces. Screw in each tightening nut by hand until it contacts the surface. Mark the nuts and seating surface. Attach the hydraulic jack with the same procedures used for disassembly. Attach the high-pressure hoses. Raise the oil pressure with the hydraulic pump and tighten the nut. Tighten the nuts firmly by tapping the tool handle with a hammer. Slowly open the release valve of the hydraulic pump to gradually decrease the oil pressure to 0. After increasing the oil pressure again to the specified value, tap the jack handle with a hammer with the same force as that applied in the above step to retighten the circular nut and make sure it does not turn any further. Remove the high-pressure hoses and jacks. Check the nut marking positions after tightening. Fit the rubber cap on each of the threaded portions of the bolt. Apply a heat-resistant agent to the O-rings and the circular packing and attach them to the holder housing. Insert the fuel oil injection valve into the nozzle holder guide hole after confirming that the old gasket has been completely removed. After attaching the tightening nut, Tighten to the specified torque. Align the inlet connector slit to the high-pressure fuel block side and insert it into the cylinder head. If you attach a different inlet connector, the variance may cause oil leaks. Make sure to use the same inlet connector. Fit the high-pressure fuel flange on the fuel oil injection pump side through the O-ring. Fit the fuel high-pressure block and the O-ring on the cylinder head side. Apply lubricant, Molykote 1000 spray, to the seats and threads of the fuel high-pressure block tightening bolts and tighten them to the specified torque. Turn the flywheel to the top combustion position. Mount the valve holding T. Adjust its horizontal level using a dial gauge or your sense of touch. After finishing the adjustment, tighten the lock nut completely. Then insert the push rod. Clean the bottom of the rocker arm and mount the rocker arm shaft on the cylinder head. Then apply lubricant to the threaded portions and the bearing surface of the rocker arm shaft holder tightening nut. Finally, tighten the nut to the specified torque. Loosen the rocker arm adjustment screw. Adjust the rocker arm gap with the thickness gauge and then tighten the lock nut completely. Mount the indicator valve. Tighten the exhaust manifold tightening bolts. Mount the thermometer. Mount the cooling water outlet main pipe and tighten with mounting bolts. Replace all the gaskets of each pipe with new ones. Tighten the starting valve piping. Attach the cylinder head cover. Fuel oil injection pump inspection and maintenance. Remove the fuel oil injection pump from the engine and consult the manual. Secure the fuel oil injection pump in the vise with the tappet facing upward. Use a gear puller or the like to press and hold the tappet and remove the retaining pin with the bolt. Be careful that the tappet roller does not pop out due to the force of the spring. Remove the components of the tappet assembly in the following order: plate, lower spring seat, spring, plunger, and upper spring seat. Remove the control sleeve and the control rack. Release the injection pump from the vise. Turn the pump upside down and refasten it in the vise. Put matching marks on the delivery valve holder and the flange. Remove the mounting bolt and remove the delivery valve assembly. Remove the positioning screw. Remove the deflector. Remove the injection pump from the vise. Hold the plunger barrel by hand and remove it from the main body. If the plunger barrel does not come out, place a piece of wood on its opposite end and tap the wood lightly with the hammer to push out the plunger barrel. When disassembling components, classify them into groups depending on the pumps from which they come. Be sure not to mix the components of one cylinder with components from another cylinder. Wash and air blow all parts. Inspect the plunger, plunger barrel, and deflector for any signs of corrosion. Replace any excessively corroded component with the new one. Now, we will reassemble the fuel oil injection pump. To reassemble the fuel oil injection pump, start by making sure that all the parts are organized. Remember to replace all O-rings and backup rings. Attach the O-ring and backup rings to the plunger barrel and apply grease. Hold the pump body with its delivery valve side upwards and secure it in a vise. Align the barrel positioning bolt hole on the pump body with the hole on the barrel. Insert the barrel into the pump body. Mount the barrel positioning bolt. Align the delivery valve assembly dowel and mount the assembly on the pump body. Apply anti-abrasion paste on the thread and seat surface of each of the bolts. Tighten the bolts evenly in diagonal order with the prescribed torque. Mount the deflector. Release the pump body from the vise. Turn the pump body upside down and fasten it in the vise again. Apply grease to the gear teeth of the control rack on the inner surface of the control sleeve. Align the first teeth on the rack and sleeve, starting from 0 millimeters on the rack, and assemble them. Apply the upper spring seat, plunger, spring, lower spring seat in this order. To mount the plunger, the Z mark in the lower part must be in the opposite direction to the rack. Attach the plate and tappet assembly. Use a gear puller or the like to press and hold the tappet and mount the holding pin. Use caution not to damage the tappet or roller during reassembly. When completing the reassembly, confirm that the rack moves smoothly and that the 0 point is correct. Piston and connecting rod inspection and maintenance. If the case of piston extraction only, it is not necessary to disassemble the large end part. Conduct the work by separating the large end part from the small end and trunk part. Take off the cover on the engine frame on both sides of the cylinder to be overhauled, and turn the crankshaft to place the piston to about 50 degrees before the top dead center position. Place a waste-cloth on the upper surface of the piston to easily discard the removed carbon. Remove the carbon deposited on the upper areas of the protect ring and cylinder liner with sandpaper or the like. To make clear which is the top side, mark the top surface of the protect ring with an oil-based white marker or something similar. Attach the protect ring tool and gradually remove the piston by turning the nut. Remove the carbon deposited in the piston lifter screw holes using a tap. Attach the eye bolt of the top of the piston and set the wire rope. Turn the crankshaft to locate the piston to be dismantled to its dead center bottom position. Remove the stop wires from the connecting rod connector bolts and loosen and remove the connector bolts using the special eye socket and a torque wrench. Fit the eye bolt at the top of the piston and lift the piston with the wire rope and a chain block. Then draw out the piston with the connecting rod small end part. When lifting the piston, take care that the connecting rod does not scratch the cylinder liner's inner surface. After drawing out the piston, cover the cylinder liner with a clean cloth or vinyl sheet to prevent foreign matter from entering the engine. Keep the piston hung on the wire. Place the connecting rod flange on a wooden board on the floor. Use a pair of snap ring pliers to remove the snap ring on one side. Draw out the piston pin and remove the small end part of the connecting rod from the piston. Remove the compression rings and oil ring. Before servicing the piston, check the parts of the piston and record their conditions. Check the piston's combustion surface and the top gland to ascertain whether carbon has adhered to them and that they are lubricated satisfactorily. Check for flaws and abnormal contacts on the sliding parts. Check that the piston ring does not seize and the chrome plating has not peeled off the piston ring. Check for abnormal contact marks and wear on the piston ring. Check for adhesion of carbon sludge to the piston's rear surface and the bottom of the ring grooves. Check for local corrosion and wear of the ring grooves. Check for abnormal contact between the piston pin boss and the connecting rod small end support. Check for abnormal contact between the piston pin and the pin boss inner surface. Remove any carbon that is adhered to the piston top surfaces, combustion surface and top land, with fine sandpaper. Clean the piston and rings with wash oil. Carefully clean the piston combustion surface and the ring grooves, perform a color check, and carefully check for cracks. Clean the piston pin with wash oil and blow air into the lubricating hole to clean the inside. Measure the outer diameter of the piston at 3 positions with an outside micrometer and record the diameters. If the clearance at any of the positions exceeds the limit for replacement, replace the piston with the new one. Measure the outer diameter of the piston pin and the inner diameter of the piston pin boss. Replace the more heavily worn part with the new one. Check for fretting at the connecting rod joint. Check the condition of the piston pin and the piston pin metal. Measure the piston rings and piston ring grooves clearance. Measure the inside diameter of the cylinder liner like this. Keeping the liner mounted on the engine frame, attach the piston gauge in place and respectively measure the inner diameters at 4 upper and lower positions with the cylinder bore gauge. Open the connecting rod, large end bore, to check and replace the crank pin bearing shell. Turn the crankshaft to locate the crank pin at 85 degrees before top dead center and place the large end part horizontally. Place the large end part sideways and insert the connecting rod's large end part, attachment and removal tool into the bottom side. Simultaneously, loosen the 2 circular nuts on the crank pin bolts using the hydraulic jack. Set the jack stand, attach the hydraulic jack assembly to the crank pin bolts, and connect the terminal and the hydraulic pump with the high-pressure hose. Operate the hydraulic pump lever to increase the oil pressure to the specified value and loosen the circular nuts using the jack handle. Confirm the oil pressure at which the circular nuts start turning and check that the nuts have been securely tightened. Remove the hydraulic jack assembly and the jack stand. Loosen and remove the circular nuts by hand. Remove the large ends, upper and lower parts from the left and right inspection windows, respectively. When removing the large end part on the trunk side, take care not to damage the crank pin bolt threads and the crank pin. Remove the crank pin metal from the large end part. Tap the claw side of the metal with a piece of wood. Then the metal can be removed easily. Put the cylinder number and upper and lower identification marks on the disassembled metal parts. Check the contact of the piston pin bush at the small end. Check for looseness and deviation of the bush in the fitting area. Check for flaws and fretting on the mating surfaces of the trunk and the large end part. Check for scratches and peeling on the threaded portions and bearing surfaces of the connecting rod, on the connecting bolts, and on the crank pin bolts. Check for wear and fretting on the serrated surfaces. Check for scratches and peeling on the contact surfaces of the large end cap with the circular nuts. Check for scratches and peeling on the threaded portions and bearing surfaces of the circular nuts. After cleaning the serrated surfaces, perform a color check to check for flaws. Blow air into the oil hole, going through the rod part, to clean the inside. Check that the rear surfaces and mating surfaces of the crank pin metal are free from fretting. Check that the inner surfaces are free from seizure marks, peeling, cavitation, and foreign matter. Clean the crank pin metal, measure its thickness with a spherical micrometer, and record it. Without using the bearing metals, assemble the large end and small end portions of the connecting rod. When the joint bolts and crank pin bolts are tightened with the prescribed pressure, measure the bores of the large end. Let's reassemble a connecting rod large end bore. Before reassembling, clean the parts with wash oil and blow air into the threaded holes. Wipe dirt and oil off the large end housing inner surface and the crank pin bearing rear surface. Check the identification marks on the crank pin bearing, fit the claw into the groove in the large end housing, and mount the bearing in the center of the large end housing. Tap the center of the crank pin bearing by hand to fit the bearing closely to the housing. Wipe the crank pin surface clean and apply lubricating oil to the crank pin and the crank pin bearing inner surface. Use the connecting rod's large end part attachment and removal tool that was used for disassembly. While using caution not to damage the crank pin or the thread on the crank pin bolt, fit the large end part in place from both sides just as during disassembly, only this time in the opposite direction. Screw in the circular nut for each crank pin bolt by hand until it contacts the surface. Attach the hydraulic jack in the same manner as when disassembling, and simultaneously tighten the two nuts to the specified oil pressure. Remove high-pressure hoses, jacks, and the attachment and removal tool. Then confirm the deviation of the serrated surface. Turn the large end bore by hand to confirm that it can rotate smoothly. Turn the crankshaft to locate the crank pin at the bottom dead center. Reassemble the piston and the connecting rod trunk. Securely mount the eye bolt M10 on the top side of the piston. Hang the piston by using the eye bolt. Place the connecting rod on its flange part on a piece of wood. Align the raised face on the flange of the rod part of the connecting rod with the stamp F on the combustion surface of the piston. Insert the rod part of the connecting rod into the piston. Apply lubricating oil to the outer periphery of the piston pin and the inside of the piston pin boss. Align the pinholes while suspending the piston and insert the piston pin. Fit the snap ring into the groove using snap ring pliers. Fit the piston inserting tool into the upper part of the cylinder liner. Wind the coil into the oil ring groove in the piston and insert the coil joint. Set the coil joint on the opposite side to the ring's closed gap. Fit the oil ring. Use the piston ring pliers to mount the compression rings. Fit the rings with their production marks facing upward. Fit them in the correct positions. Shift the positions of the closed gaps of the rings by 90 degrees to prevent the closed gaps from aligning with each other. Hang the piston and connecting rod. Apply sufficient lubricating oil to the piston, piston rings, piston inserting tool, and cylinder liner with a lubricator. Check the cylinder number. Confirm that the F mark at the piston top and the embossed area on the connecting rod are set on the engine front side, and insert the piston into the cylinder liner. Lower the piston slowly and fit the nocks of the large end part and the trunk. When mounting the piston in the cylinder liner, tap the periphery of the piston with a plastic hammer to facilitate insertion. Take care that the flange on the connecting rod trunk does not damage the inner surface of the cylinder liner. Remove the eye bolt at the piston top and the piston inserting tool. Insert the protect ring into the cylinder liner by hand, taking care not to tilt it. Apply lubricant to the threaded portions and the seat surface of the connecting rod connector bolts, and fit the bolts to the positions marked with their identification numbers. Tighten the connecting rod connector bolts to the specified angle in accordance with the following procedure. Tighten the bolts uniformly in the tightening order to the specified torque A. Make sure that the torque mark A on the bolt is aligned with the A mark on the bearing surface. Tighten the bolts to the mark B in the order of 1, 4, 2, 3, 1. Check that the connecting rod large end part has allowance for side motion. If there are no problems, fit a wire ring to prevent turning. Let's move on to the main bearing shell maintenance procedure. Normally, you can disassemble and inspect the main bearing without completely removing the main bearing cap. Lower the main bearing cap, and only the main bearing can be dismantled. Remove the engine frame side covers of the cylinders before and after the main bearing to be disassembled. Then, position the crank pin on the side on which disassembly and inspection will be performed, at approximately 95 degrees before top dead center. Remove the side bolt protecting cap. Use the hydraulic jack to remove the side bolt nut. The side bolt protecting cap is threaded. Turn the cap to loosen it before removing it. Attach the jack stand and the hydraulic jack assembly to each of the side bolts and connect the assembly and the hydraulic pump with the high pressure hoses. Operate the hydraulic pump lever to increase the oil pressure to the specified value and loosen the nut with the jack handle. Confirm the oil pressure at which the nut starts turning and check that the nut has been securely tightened. Remove the hydraulic jack assemblies and jack stands. Remove the nuts. Remove the main bearing cap tightening nuts C using the hydraulic jack. Attach the jack stand and the hydraulic jack assembly to each main bearing cap bolt and connect the assembly to the hydraulic pump with the high pressure hoses. Operate the hydraulic pump lever to increase the oil pressure to the specified value and loosen the main bearing cap tightening nut using the jack handle. Confirm the oil pressure at which the main bearing cap tightening nut starts turning and check that the nut has been securely tightened. Remove the high pressure hose from the hydraulic jack assembly and remove the hydraulic jack assembly and jack stand. Lower the main bearing cap in accordance with the following procedure. Attach the main bearing cap C-tools to the main bearing cap bolt. Screw the tool 3 to which the C4 nut has been fitted onto each main bearing cap bolt until the tool tip gets into contact. Fit the C2 tool and the C1 tool to which the nuts have been fitted onto the C3 tools from the side and secure the tool with the nuts. Fit the C2 tool to the main bearing cap and secure the C2 tool with the nut. Loosen the main bearing cap tightening nut approximately 15 millimeters from the nut contact surface of the main bearing cap. Loosen and remove the side bolts. Turn the nut to lower it until it touches the tool. Turn the two main bearing cap tightening nuts to remove them from the main bearing cap bolts. Put the nuts on the C1 tool. Raise the C7 nut approximately 15 millimeters and turn the C6 nut to lower the main bearing cap. Repeat the operation to lower the main bearing cap until the distance between the C5 nut and the C7 nut is approximately 10 millimeters. Remove the lower bearing from the main bearing cap. Remove the upper bearing in accordance with the following procedure. Insert the main bearing pin into the lubricating hole in the crankshaft. Press the main bearing pin against the end face of the upper bearing without a claw. Then turn the crankshaft counterclockwise when viewed from the engine front side and remove the upper bearing. When removing the upper bearing, receive it in your palm to avoid damaging it. Turn the crankshaft and remove the main bearing pin from the lubricating hole in the crankshaft. Check that the rear surfaces and mating surfaces of the main bearing are free from fretting. Check that the inner surfaces are free from seizure marks, peeling, cavitation, and foreign matter. Check the bearing surfaces of the tightening nuts and the cap. If the surfaces are rough, repair them. Check that the main bearing cap mating surfaces and the contact surfaces of the fitting areas are free from defects such as fretting. Check visually and by touching with bare hands that the crankshaft journal is free from foreign matter and flaws. After cleaning the inner and rear surfaces of the main bearing metal with wash oil, carefully wipe the oil off the surfaces. Carefully wipe off the oil that is accumulated in the bearing part of the engine frame. Mount the upper bearing metal in the engine frame in accordance with the following procedure. Check the positions of the upper bearing metal claw and the notch in the engine frame and push in the upper bearing by hand from the side not provided with the claw until it stops. Insert the main bearing pin into the lubricating hole in the crankshaft in the same manner as when disassembling. Turn the crankshaft clockwise when viewed from the engine front side and push the upper bearing until its end face aligns with the engine frame mating surface's main bearing cap. Turn the crankshaft counterclockwise when viewed from the engine front side and remove the main bearing pin. Confirm again that the upper bearing metal is set in position. Mount the lower bearing metal in the main bearing cap in accordance with the following procedure. Recheck by touching with bare hands that the crankshaft journal and the main bearing cap inner surface are free from foreign matter and flaws. Check the positions of the lower bearing metal, main bearing cap end face and claw, and fit the lower bearing to the main bearing cap. Make sure that the main bearing metal is fitted securely. Apply a sufficient amount of lubricating oil to the lower bearing metal's inner surface with your bare hands. Remount the main bearing cap in accordance with the reverse procedure for removal. Turn the nut on the main bearing cap tool and raise the main bearing cap while fitting the side faces of the main bearing cap to the side faces of the engine frame. Screw the tightening nut on each main bearing cap bolt until the nut gets into contact with the surface. Screw in the tightening nuts using the jack handle D3 until the main bearing cap touches the engine frame mating surface. Make sure that the side faces of the main bearing cap are fitted to the side faces of the engine frame. Remove the main bearing cap tools. Screw the side bolts into the threaded holes in the main bearing cap by hand. After screwing them until their tips get into contact with the hole bottoms, rotate them back a half turn. Screw in the side bolt nuts by hand until they contact the surface. tighten the main bearing cap, tightening nuts. In the same manner as when disassembling, attach the main bearing jack stand and the hydraulic jack assembly to each nut and tighten them to the specified oil pressure. Tighten the two nuts simultaneously. After tightening them to the specified pressure, return the oil pressure to 0 once, and then increase it again to the specified value to check the tightening state. Remove the high-pressure hoses, jacks, and jack stands. Tighten the side bolts. In the same manner as when disassembling, attach the side bolt jack stand and the hydraulic jack assembly to each bolt and tighten it to the specified oil pressure. Tighten the two side bolts of the same main bearing simultaneously. After tightening them to the specified pressure, return the oil pressure to 0 once and increase it again to the specified value to check the tightening state. Remove the high-pressure hoses, jacks, and jack stands. Attach the side bolt protecting rubber cap. When you complete reassembling the main bearing, measure the deflection. After the operation, clean and check the inside of the crankcase. Check to see if it turns easily. Check if the priming pump is working properly. When the maintenance process is completed, carry out an air run. Close the indicator valve and start a no-load operation. After starting the engine, check for oil and water leaks from each area. Go over various parts of the engine by hand to check for any abnormalities. After checking the engine, stop the engine. After stopping the engine, remove the side cover and check the temperature of the bearing. At the same time, check for any other abnormalities by hand. Fit the side cover. You've just watched the periodical maintenance processes for the DE18. For further information, please consult the manual. Here are some points to remember. Wear safety clothing. Use and follow signals. Be neat and tidy. Store measurement data. Use genuine parts. Look for tally marks. Observe prescribed tightening torques. Observe prescribed hydraulic jack pressures. Observe proper maintenance intervals. As seen in this video and noted in the instruction manual, proper maintenance is necessary to ensure your engine's long life and efficient service.